training events for the RISE Innovation Challenge. For those of you, just as a reminder, I know most of you have heard this before, but the RISE Innovation Challenge is a pretty cool thing. It is funding that's available, over $1 million, for folks who can bring innovations to solve some of the wicked problems associated with coastal resilience and the issues that coastal cities deal with, and also community connectedness. So my background, I'm Jerry Cronin. I'm with Old Dominion University's Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And what we're going to be covering today is something called the Business Model Canvas. At the front end, just let me say, we really encourage you to go to riseresilience.org. That's the website to learn more about this particular challenge, and especially to get your application started. And with that said, let's move on. Next slide. Okay, last time we dealt with the topic called design thinking. And if you'll remember, design thinking was all about discovering what the right problem is and figuring out a solution to that problem, as opposed to somebody coming in with a solution and then looking all over the place for a problem to apply it to. So now that you have the solution, you have to ask the question, now what? Because a solution just by itself doesn't go anywhere unless there's an organization built to sustain it and bring it into the future. And that's where something called Business Model Canvas comes in. Next slide. That's what we'll be covering today. Something called value propositions and something called the Business Model or Mission Model Canvas. Next slide. This is all part of a thing they call lean startup methodology. This is nothing we made up. If you Google it, if you go online, this is the modern way of how you take an idea, turn it into a solution, and then turn it into a business that can grow into the future. All starts with the business model canvas. What does the business model look like? Validating that business model, going out and doing a heck of a lot of customer discovery, and then agilely developing it, which means get a product out there, get your prototype out there, get it out into the field and try it, and then keep iterating and iterating and iterating until it becomes a great business. Or what sometimes happens is you had a great idea, you tried it, but when you get it out into the wild, it just doesn't work. Next slide. Okay, what we're going to talk about now is something called the value proposition canvas. And this is really the central part of that of your business model. At the end of the day, if you built a solution, but nobody considers it to be of value to them, particularly the people who are going to pay for it, then your solution's not going to go anywhere. You can think it's the most wonderful thing in the world, really doesn't matter. So what we have people do when we're working with them is this is the first place we start. We start with this thing called the value proposition canvas, and on the right-hand side of it, you see something which contains customer jobs, gains, and pains. Now, if you've done design thinking work, or even if you haven't, what you're doing here is you're thinking of those particular stakeholders, and for each one of them, you're trying to figure out what their life's like and what would be of value to them. So think about it. If you're there, you've got a solution you're going to apply to this particular competition. What I'd say is sit there and write out, just off the top of your head, all the stakeholders involved. And those are everybody from the people right there on the edge that the service is being delivered to the people who are going to pay for it. If you're talking smart cities and resilience, obviously municipalities are going to be there, maybe non-governmental organizations or agencies, getting those all down. Okay? Then what you do is typically pick out your top 2 or 3. Top 2 or 3 being, one, make sure you have the people who are impacted at the front line in there. That's your primary. But then your secondaries are also, who's going to pay for it? If you're expecting this to be grants, if you're expecting this to be something that a bank might put in on or a company might put in on, they have to be a customer segment. Okay, so for those customer segments, what you do is you start and you say, what jobs are they trying to do day to day? And those can be actual workaday type jobs, such as I need to maintain my house. I need to protect my family. To emotional ones like maybe I'm looking for the esteem of my community, those sorts of things. That might be somebody in a neighborhood that you're trying to do some resiliency work around. All right. Then what you think of for that particular customer segment, what are the pains they're experiencing? Now, if you followed the design thinking methodology, you've gone out and you've done a lot of this work already. So that'll be really, really great. What are the things that are painful for them? What gets in the way of them doing any of their jobs? So for example, if I want to maintain my house or my apartment, but I have no job, that can be a pain. If after an adverse event, think Puerto Rico, think Florida a whole bunch of times or any place, it's a pain for me to try to get material into my area to repair my home or my dwelling. Another pain might be in the midst of an event, and I'm just thinking, adverse events, because on the East Coast of the United States, we have 4 hurricanes heading our way right now. But a pain can be the power goes out and all the food spoils in my refrigerator, that sort of thing. The other thing you want to think of is gains, and gains are sort of the wow factors. So they're not just, yes, I can do my job, or yes, I got rid of a particular pain, but it would be something that just sparked somebody's mind and gets them going, wow, that's really something. So, just throwing one out, say in the midst of all this stuff, a truck just came up with its own self-powered refrigerator filled with food and put it on my front porch. That would be a wow factor. Okay? A little bit crazy, but it's there. So you try to get a picture of the customer segments. On the left-hand side, what you see is all about your solution, and the far left is products and services. If you think of a solution if you were at the design thinking seminar we held, a solution is all about a combination of people, processes, and technologies over some kind of life of engagement with your particular customer. So it's a mix of products, could be your technologies, could be your apps, could be your software, could be your hardware, but it's also the services that go along with them. Who's going to implement it? Who's going to train people to do it? How does it get to the final customer? Okay. The combination of those things, when you map them back to your circle on the right, should map to customer jobs. They should map to pains. They should map to gains. So some things become pain relievers. Some things become gain creators, and some things are just enabling the person to do their particular job. When you've done this and you do it in kind of a vigorous way, what you might find out is you find some things called orphans. And orphans would be things on the right-hand side, a job or a pain or a gain that your solution doesn't address. Now, you don't need to necessarily get all excited about that and think that's the end of the world if that occurs, because there's a lot of pains that you just can't get rid of. One of the pains in an emergency situation is my life has been disrupted. Well, you're not going to get rid of that particular pain unless the event never happened in the first place. But you need to know about it. Where you end up with kind of room for thought is if you find a whole bunch of pains or jobs that are not being done, maybe you need to add something into your solution to address that. Because the whole idea here is to get what they call product market fit, which means your products and services matches up with that customer segment's needs so much that there's value created for them, which means they're willing to do it, they're willing to pay for it, they're willing to engage with your solution. Next slide. Now this is the business model canvas. And just a quick word, this comes from a guy named Alex Osterwalder. Really, really great thing. If you go on Google and you look up business model canvas Osterwalder, you will get a ton of really, really great videos and reference material. I highly recommend you do it because getting different people's take on this stuff is oftentimes important. The heart of this whole thing is the middle part where you see the value proposition. That's where your solution is. Okay? And the right-hand side, which are your customer segments. Those things need to match and create value. So again, we talked about primary segments and secondary segments. Make sure that you have the folks in there that are frontline impacted and the folks who are going to fund whatever you're doing in some form or fashion. Because if you don't have funders, your thing goes away. If you don't have folks who are going to use your solution, the funders end up funding something that nobody uses and produces no value to the community. Just as a reiteration, solutions are that combination of goods and services which provide value, provided to your client, and they relieve pains and they create gains. Next item to look at as you're working through your canvas, customer relationships. Customer relationships are what sort of relationship that customer or that customer segment is expecting to have when they interact with your value proposition. Now, what does that mean? Okay. What it means is over the entire life cycle of how they engage with your solution, what kind of experience are they expecting to have? What kind of interaction with you? What kind of relationship are they looking to have? So the first question is, how they become aware of this solution. So say you've come up with a great response solution for after a hurricane, which is going to provide people all sorts of great things. Well, if folks aren't aware of it, how are they going to even know that they need to access it, right? So there might be some outreach that goes on there. They might expect some personal interaction where somebody goes door to door maybe and kind of fills them in on it. They might expect public service spots or something like those things to come up where it comes to them via the media. Next thing you got to think of is, how are they going to evaluate it? Just because they're aware of something doesn't mean that they're going to think it's of high value and thereby use it. So, how are you going to get them to evaluate it and see that's worthwhile? And there's a variety of ways of doing it. Most of the time, they're expecting that to be a self-service relationship. They're expecting they'll see that somewhere and they'll decide on themselves. But other times, it could be a personal one. And this is a channel, but one of their friends or somebody's talking them into it, saying, you really ought to do this and here's why. That's the evaluation relationship. And the buying decision doesn't so much apply necessarily to maybe the homeowner unless it's an insurance kind of product or solution you're putting together. But if it's the payer, if it's the people who are going to fund your thing, how are you going to assist them to make that buying decision? They're probably, if it's a big time funder, they're probably expecting that to be some sort of personal relationship or personal dedicated. You're going to have a representative from your organization go to them and work them through why this is worthwhile for them to fund or to pay for. Next area you look at is the implementation area. And what the implementation area is, okay, great solution. How do I stand it up for my particular area? So an example I can think of for this would be for software with companies. If I'm going in to provide a company with a whole new set of software, or say it's an emergency management organization with a whole new set of software, how does that get implemented? Because I just don't hand it over to them and boom, it's working for their particular needs and circumstance. A lot of times I've got to go in and I've got to find what their standard operating procedures are, what their modalities are, what their organization looks like, where their data is, and in implementing the solution, I've got to configure that solution to help their particular area. If I have a solution that's going to respond to someplace, where am I going to pre-position stuff? Where am I going to get material? All that other kind of stuff. All that needs to be put in place prior to the event happening or to enable the organization to stand up your solution. And then the last one, sustainment. Sustainment's all about, okay, they've now implemented it, they're using your solution. How do they keep your solution going? So for example, if there's parts or material that get used up, think of in the oil response arena, booms. You've got these absorbent booms you put out after a spill. Okay, well, when they use them, what do you do with them afterwards? Sort of end of life on that material. But also, how do they replenish their stock so they're ready for the next event? All those are questions that they're expecting some kind of relationship with your organization. Now, that might be an automated kind of relationship. They just expect that, they enter into their system that their number of booms has gone down from 150 to 75, and there's an automated refill that goes on, and they don't need to touch it. That might be an automated relationship. So those are the relationship customers are looking to have with you. It's over the awareness, the evaluation, the buying decision, how it gets implemented, especially that first time to make sure it's done right, and how it gets sustained over time. And the examples of the types of relationships they have with you are self-service, where they're going out and finding this stuff on themselves and making their own decisions. Good example of this in the business world is apps. Apps, you just expect to go to the app store, download it, put it onto your phone, and you expect it to work. You don't expect to call into people. You don't expect a personal relationship. And you expect the updates to be automated. They just get pushed through the system. So nobody needs to contact me. I don't need to do it myself. Next item we'll talk about is channels. The difference between channels and customer relationships is channels are how you make those customer relationships happen, how you achieve them. So for example, say for your solution that's going to be for the community after an event happens, and we're thinking of the awareness thing, it might be sufficient to do public service announcements or to make agreements with the television channels and the news channels to cover that solution and inform people that, hey, you need to sign up, all that other good stuff. So that self-service is enabled by all this media you put out there. A different way that awareness could be accomplished, we touched on it before, would be, the people we're trying to serve don't watch the news, or they don't have broadband, or they don't have television sets, or whatever. Okay, in this instance, and we decided maybe the relationship needed to be personal, now my channel might be connecting with volunteer organizations who are not going to go throughout the community door to door talking to people about this particular solution and how they can get prepped for something to happen, right? So that's an example of some awareness channels. Same thing with evaluation. Those things can go there. Same thing with that buying decision. You think of how folks are going to do it. Buying decision, they might have to go onto a website and do something. So you might make it automated so that folks can do it themselves without having a personal involvement. Other examples of implementation, and I see this one quite a bit, is you've thought of a great piece of software. Your software is going to solve the problems of the world, but you're a software company. You're not necessarily an implementation company. So I think back in the day when I worked for some of the larger computer corporations, and we'd go out and we'd roll out new giant bits of software for managing enterprises for very, very large companies. We put together an implementation team. So our job was we'd be dealing with these large clients, and they'd want to keep track of things better. We'd talk them through the buying situation, and then we'd send an implementation team. So that's an example of a personal relationship, or maybe even personal dedicated. I assign a client representative who's going to deal with this city, or who's going to deal with this company, or deal with this particular sets of people to get stuff implemented. So if you're a software company, thinking back to our discussion on solutioning in design thinking, you got to think of how this gets implemented. And if you're not going to do it, your channel might be a partner. So a channel in some of the things for smart cities or resiliency or connected communities could be leveraging in with community service organizations or nonprofits that exist already in the community, or maybe even a branch of the city. So you work on maintaining your software, and those people are doing the implementation. Channels for sustainment. Think of maybe running training or putting online training so that when personnel switch over in your solution. So say you implement a solution for a city or a town, and half the people move away during the next transfer cycle. Well, you've got a whole bunch of people who don't know how to interact with that solution or deliver it anymore. So maybe you have to build training as a channel in there, and maybe you outsource that training to a third-party channel. So that's the example of channels. Moving over to the left side, if we think of the right side of being the what's you're delivering, how you're creating the value delivered to those customer segments, the left-hand side of this thing is how are you going to make it work? How are you going to deliver this? And in the middle, you see something called key activities. Key activities are everything you see on the right. What are the key activities you need to do to stand this solution up and then to maintain it and sustain it over time? So if you haven't yet designed your implementation methodology or how this piece of software is going to get delivered and implemented in the place, one of your key activities is to lay that all out. Another key activity might be, definitely would be your marketing. How are you going to get this stuff going? A key activities for starting something up is how you're going to get it funded and financed. So you think of the startup activities, which is how you bring it into being. And then the next thing you think about is, okay, once it exists, how do you run it and maintain it? So if I'm going to build a business that's going to grow, and quite frankly, for this competition, one of the things you need to do is figure out how this thing is going to sustain itself and grow itself. It's not just meant to be a solution for Norfolk or Hampton Roads or Virginia Beach. It's meant to be something you can take from place to place to place to place. You need to work through these items so you can adequately define how that's going to happen. So once you get it up and going, obviously you need all the back office stuff, including some kind of company to run this through. But marketing and sales, you're going to need to maintain your software. You're going to need implementation teams. You're going to need help desk perhaps, or part supplies or stores or things along those lines. Establishing those are all the key activities to make the right side of this model work. If you look below, now we talk about key resources. And what key resources is all about is, okay, to do those key activities up top, who and what do I need to make this work? So for example, if I have parts that I'm going to keep on hand, I need storage for those parts. I need a warehouse. I need a facility. If for marketing and sales, I need a marketing and sales staff. I need coders. If there's a training component, I need instructional systems designers and then trainers to go out and deliver. So you list down all those key resources as part of doing this. And then on the far left side, you see what you call key partners. And the thing about key partners is any of those key resources you're not doing yourself becomes a key partner. So for example, if you build your solution on the Microsoft SharePoint platform, Microsoft doesn't own a part of your company, but Microsoft is definitely a key partner, because if SharePoint goes away or they change it, you have to change everything of what you're doing. If you're producing some sort of mitigation materials to use in an emergency, your suppliers of your raw materials and your parts to build those things, they are key partners. If you're going to leverage, say, community-based organizations to get out there and be the personal, one-on-one, face-to-face people out there in the community, key partners can be the YMCA. It can be the Boys and Girls Clubs. It can be Habitat for Humanity. It can be whoever in the location you're going to has the best connections into the populations you're trying to reach. Those are all key partners. Now, at the bottom, you see the part that we like to call here at ODU in the Institute, mean old Mr. Math. Because at the end of the day, what you bring in revenue, what cash flows in, no matter from where, has to be more than the left-hand side, which is your cost structure. And one guy I've always particularly loved is a guy named Peter Drucker. So Peter Drucker made this up a million years ago, or how long ago, ever long ago it was. There's no such thing as a nonprofit. Any organization has to bring in more resources, more revenue than it expends. Otherwise, all the goodness associated with your solution goes away. So this needs to be thought through pretty carefully. So let's run through it quick. Revenue streams. You have to ask yourself, how in the long term is this going to be paid for? And just kind of coming out of the gate, grants and donations are a really, really hard way to sustain an organization over time. It can be done, but you're going to spend a lot of your time going out and keep trying to bring that stuff in, which is okay, but you got to plan for it. But the other issue is, okay, you get change in politics, you get change in people's attitudes, that money can go away. So try to think of, transactional. Can you provide a service that somebody would buy from you? Can you provide a thing into the community that would make somebody more money than they were paying out, particularly on the paying side? Another thing you can think of is subscriptions. Is this something people could subscribe to? So if you come up with a really good solution, can you basically, it's not necessarily franchising it, but can you package that and become the implementers of that other places in the world in such a fashion that you can get paid for it? Or you create supporting materials that folks around the world are going to use in that same circumstance. Those are ways of generating revenues into your operation. Think of implementation consulting. So if you're going to implement some software or an issue in a particular place, they're going to need help in doing that. You can charge for that, and that brings in revenue. That's all got to balance the left-hand side, which is your cost structure. And the way to look at that, what are your costs of starting up, right? Developing the solution, getting your initial product out there, then ongoing. What are your fixed costs, your general office costs, those sorts of things, the thing you're going to pay regardless of how many times you do it, and then ongoing, your variable costs. So every client I bring in, every new municipality, every new city, what's it cost me to do the implementation there? That would be a variable cost, because if I don't implement an instance of it in a new city, I don't incur that cost. So that's the business model canvas. Really work through it. Next slide. Okay, just a few quick lessons learned. Breadth first. What people tend to want to do, especially technologists, which I can relate to, is you want to go way, 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 way down in your technical solution until you got every last detail defined before you do the other things. Our recommendation is you take a good broad cut across this entire business model, and then you start refining it bit by bit. You don't dig deep into a particular area down until you have every last thing defined, because you might do that, but then when you get to the revenue or the cost structure, you find out, hey, this doesn't make sense, and you have to pivot on what you're doing. Validate. Talk to your customers and beneficiaries. Google it. Understand you'll pivot. That means you're going to change over time, because nothing really works the way you thought it would at first. Sometimes the idea bears fruit, most times not. That's okay. And don't solve the whole world at once. Remember, coming out with a minimal viable product where you chew off a nice size piece to begin with, but not the whole thing, is pretty good recommendation. Next slide. This is just a page of resources. I've got Osterwilder up there, Eric Reese, who's a guru on this stuff, Steve Blank. You can contact the Rise Resilience Office. In fact, following up on this was an overview, but we provide one-on-one help to companies out there. We've got a budget for doing that. So we encourage you, if you want help thinking through this stuff or working through this stuff, contact us at riseresilience.org. We'd love to help you, and we're really, really looking forward to your submissions. Have a great rest of your day.